if you have questions, we have plenty of time to answer them, because I think race walk is always the one that folks get nervous about. I think they get nervous about it because it is governed by some pretty particular rules. I think people don't necessarily always understand how to tell the difference between flight time and no flight time, and when to hold someone accountable for that. And so I want to give an opportunity to do that. So let me see if I can pull. Okay. So one moment. Sorry. I had the video ready. There we go. So I will actually enlarge this for folks. So we'll play a little bit. I've got a couple of places I'll stop it and I'll go forward. And then I can certainly give people, this is a resource and you can watch the entire video. So let's. I'm just going to pause it and put a plug in. That's our very own Miranda Melville, Section 5 athlete and Olympian. Just pointing that out. I'm going to say you all probably could pick that pedestrian out. Okay, so I'm gonna pause it there and move it ahead so that we can look at some other pieces for folks, because we will talk about and the last piece does talk about judging a group.
No, we're on. So did you get the second one she sent? Okay, I can send you I can send you the, you want. Oh, it's about 40 letters. About 40 letters long, so it's easier if I just send you it. Okay, fine.
Okay, so I'm going to say that when we're judging, and this was really hammered home when I first was taught to judge, um, the best way to do that is actually to start at their heel where the foot touches the ground and go up from there. If you're trying to look down, you sort of get caught with what their upper body is doing, what their arms are doing. And while that's certainly important to their efficiency, for your purposes for judging, you need to know if that's straight coming down. And the easiest way to do that is, again, to look from the heel and go straight up to see if that's a straight line going up. And this is a really nice shot of Miranda holding that form. So you can easily tell that she is certainly very straight there.
A person that, who. I want to make sure that you got his, I saw that you were.
Okay, so let me stop sharing that. So I think there are a couple of good points. I think if you are in a situation where you have high schoolers, I know many of us do high school as well, and you're officiating, I think there's a couple of things to remember about officiating for high school. I know Section 6 has had conversations, I believe, around whether they should be showing yellow paddles to the athletes, feeling like that may be anxiety provoking. Those yellow paddles, they're simply a warning. They're an opportunity for that athlete to make a correction. And at the high school level, even at the college level, it's interesting to see, you know, as long as officials don't make those paddles sort of scary and give them more power than they have, the athletes tend to try to correct whatever error that is. So it's an opportunity for them. They're fairly new in race walking, and so it's an opportunity for them to really correct that behavior. And it's an opportunity for a judge, right? So if someone goes by you and you're not so sure about their form, it's an opportunity for you that either that time or even the next time around to say, hey, that doesn't look quite right. Pay attention to your form. And so you're giving the benefit to the athlete to for an opportunity. A red card is not a one and done, as many of you know, right? It, depending on the event, it can take 3 to 4 red cards now based on IAAF, or actually World Athletic standards, for an elite athlete to be disqualified from an event. So in World Athletic events right now, it is typical that there is a pit lane. So after 3 red cards, so 3 votes for disqualification from 3 different judges, an athlete would spend a predetermined amount of time in the penalty zone and then get a chance to go back out and sort of redeem themselves and be clean the rest of the race. If they get 1 more red card, then they would be disqualified from that race. I will say that right now, in time of COVID, the pit lane is being used less right now. I know that for the National 50K coming up this weekend and the Women's National 35, both out in Santee, that they will not be using the pit lane. And there was a concerted effort and decision made not to use that pit lane. It is a small space. They felt like even though the race is outdoors, it's a small confined space. It met more people. And so there was a greater risk of COVID transmission in that. And so there was a decision made not to do that. And World Athletics had to be okay with that in order for it to be on their schedule. Additionally, there is a new piece for the US. A couple of years ago, IAAF, again, now World Athletics, came out with a ruling that in the last 100 meters, the head official, who is usually stationed near the finish line, has that sort of that stretch there, can disqualify an athlete if they are flagrantly not following the 2 rules, right? So if there is definite like running, if there is definite bent knee, they have the opportunity to do that. we in the US through USATF have made a decision that we need to somehow denote that from our other sort of red cards. So there's actually now a yellow card for the chief judges that they may use in that last 100 meters. So that's a way that we can sort of tally and keep track. It could be that someone had 3 and was in a penalty box and then was clean and then just came charging into the finish. And that would have then been a 4th. Or it could have been that they received paddles during the race, but no red cards. But it's a way to track and document that. And that really sort of came out of a situation that happened at the Rio Olympic trials, where someone was disqualified near the end. And so we have a way now to denote that as unique and special. I think with your high schoolers, I think one of the things that I hear frequently from folks, so I guess it's not high schoolers alone, it's anyone, you know, that kid is running, that kid is running. And I think the video showed it really well. There is flight time. Your elite race walkers have flight time. All of them do, not just US elite race walkers, you know, not just Maria Mishka-Coffey, Miranda Melville, John Nunn, you know, not just those folks, but worldwide they do. And so the question is always, is it visible when you're just straight looking at it? Not, could it be visible if you stopped it and took a picture of it? Because of course it will be. And I think that's where people get hung up. I think the other place people get hung up is that some race walkers, particularly if they're younger, have a lot of bounce in their upper body. And so people are looking at the bounce, or they're looking at a ponytail going up and down, and they're saying, yes, that person is absolutely losing contact. And they really might not be. That may just be the way that they haven't learned to kind of isolate their upper body yet. And so it's really important when we officiate race walk to be making sure that we are looking really from the hips down. So we are officiating the legs. Would I like to see their upper body, you know, a little bit more contained? Sure, I would. Some of that comes with core work. Some of that comes with just age and proficiency in race walking. And it can be distracting to officials. I know that. I know that as an official, I know it as an athlete, as I've been told, stop moving your upper body. It makes me want to look at you twice, and I shouldn't have to look at you twice because your form is solid on the bottom half. But because the top half, I keep looking at you, thinking there's going to be more at the bottom. So it's a growth for them, but we have to remember that we're really looking for 2 things. Once that heel hits, is that leg straight? And are they visibly up off the ground? Not, do we see ponytails bobbing? Not, does it look like there's an up and down movement of them? But can we really visibly see underneath them as if they were running? And that's the piece that I think a lot of people have a hard time with. I think it's always important to remember that we err on the side of the athlete, right? So if you question whether they are or aren't, give them a paddle. It's okay. It's a, hey, I'm not really sure, your form looks a little wonky to me. Give them the paddle, give them an opportunity. I know there are several racers that I have done who come out of the start and they are like, that's like they've been caged animals, and they come out like they're bad out of nowhere. And first lap, second lap, somebody hits them with a paddle and they immediately go, oh, and they settle right down. I mean, just as much as we get anxious about other things, these race walkers get anxious about racing too. And so sometimes they come out a little fast, because they know it's an important race. they know it could be their sectional qualifying time. It could be their state qualifying time. It could be their national championship qualifying time. It could be their Olympic time. So they know that. And we have to remember that it's okay to just give them a nudge and say, okay, if you're anxious, now's the time to settle down because you look wonky. The recording sheets, if people have questions on those, they are really, they're fairly basic. You really just have to mark the athlete's number, the time, and whatever the offense is, whether you gave a yellow paddle or actually did a red card. And they're right on the cards, right? So squiggly line, if you could see that they were up off the ground, and a little part of an arrow, right? To indicate that they had a bent knee. And you just put the time next to it. I think the things to remember would be that you have to sign all your cards. So whether it's a red card or whether it's your tally sheet, you do have to sign them all. I think those are the important things. I'm wondering if folks have questions, specific questions.
I do.
Yes.
Is my audio on? Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Oh, good. You mentioned earlier that if three different judges give an offense on their tally sheet, then an individual would have to go into the penalty lane and spend some time there, and then they can come out. Now, if they get one more offense, I don't know if you call it a
red card. We call them red cards.
Okay.
Yep.
And does that one offense have to come from someone different than the first three? So it's got to be a different fourth person.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Not one of the three over here. Okay.
And
then
the challenge becomes, certainly at high school and college level, sometimes you don't have that many judges.
Right. Yeah.
You only have three, right?
Yeah.
So, I think high school, a lot of times it's been pretty clear, and everyone is like, nope, this person, I would have absolutely. Right. And so that's how that decision has been made when all three are at the end of the race. We're like, what did you have down? I had racer number 3 for bent knee. So did I. Okay, right. Racer number 3 done. But at other levels, if you're talking about a USATF event, those will typically have 5 officials.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Plus someone to run the DQ board. So there's a board.
Right.
And the numbers will be on there, and the athletes can check every time they go around. Do I have any red cards that have been recorded at this point?
Yes, that's I think a very helpful thing that we're not always able to do at high school level, but
right.
Seeing that at the USATF.
And that happens, I think, in part because our high school races are so short.
Yeah.
That it becomes a challenge. And I will say, even doing New Balance Nationals down south a couple of years ago, we had two female races and 1 male race because we had so many high school girls entered in it. And we actually couldn't tally any of the races until after the boys race.
Right,
so everybody had to sit. Nobody, unless they were actually pulled off because they were disqualified. And we knew that well in advance, but typically we didn't know that. There was no way. We didn't have a recorder. We didn't have a DQ board. So the only way they would have been notified, like at the finish line, is if it was in that last 100 meters. And our chief judge, if Ian would have disqualified them at that point. Otherwise, they all had to kind of sit on pins and needles and wait for us to tally those.
Thank you.
So Sharon, at big meets, all the judges have electronic tablets that communicate to a board that a particular racer has 3 3 red cards that they have to do a penalty lap, or, I mean, how is that all coordinated?
So it does depend on the event. So on an international level, so let's talk about like when World Athletics did their their the their meet in London a couple of years ago. So all of those officials, yes, had tablets. Rio, the officials all had tablets. They'll have them in Tokyo, and they will literally key in the information they need. It will trigger to the chief official, who's usually down by the finish line in the pit lane, and he'll get the readout. It will spit also to the board. And then he'll notify them as they come by that they'll need to do a pit lane.
So the chief official notifies the racer they have a penalty
Yep.
lap or
Yep.
whatever.
Because when you talk about races like Tokyo, Rio, so Olympic level, world competitions, those sorts of competitions, there's an interesting dynamic that goes on with those. And that is, I mean, you could have 8 judges out on there. You could have 2 from China, 2 from the US, 1 from Ireland. I mean, you could have a whole composition of them. But if, let's say we had 2 from the US, and one judge votes for disqualification, and then another one comes through as a disqualification, that only counts as 1 vote for disqualification for those athletes. 1 country, 1 vote. Is how that works with those sorts of meets. So that's really important that the chief judge and the recorder are looking at those to say, I want to make sure that, like China hasn't, each of the Chinese official judges have not done a vote for DQ, and that this person now has 2 or 3 DQs. They should only have one from China. So that's all done electronically. I will say at US national events, we are not quite there yet to do a tablet. They are piloting out in Santee this weekend, that folks will be texting to the recorder. And so they'll be texting which judge, the athlete's number, the offense, and the time, and they'll be texting that to her. And part of that, again, is safeguard, fewer people touching paper, handing it off. It diminishes us having to have a runner going around. And so that's the plan that they're trying this weekend. The meet I just did, the college championship meet I just did, we had a runner that went around for a 3,000 meter race. So she went around a couple of different times, picked up our cards, and took them over to the recorder. So
I have a question. When you
Sure.
are judging masters, older masters, 70, 80-year-olds, do you take into account if they have like arthritis in their knees and they can't quite straighten their knee?
technically, I'm not supposed to. And I think if it's a USATF event, I think to some degree, I think most of the officials give a little bit of leeway.
Okay.
I think we understand that sometimes there's some mechanics that happen. I will say at World Masters and at like the NACAC version of Masters, that is not taken into account. And so if you are not straight, you're going to get hammered.
Okay.
There. Yeah. And I know it's been a discussion. And I think it's equally a discussion, I mean, Section 5, we have a young lady who, I know it's been an issue. People have talked about her race walking style the last couple of years, and really became a discussion last year. Her mechanics are such that her knee looks funky. It's the only way I can describe it. It looks funky. And her kneecap actually isn't centered. And so it's off to the side. So straight doesn't quite look straight on her. And so there's always a lot of questions about that. So I think judges try to look at that. And I think that's where the paddle is super helpful, Kathy. Because that's an opportunity to say, hey, it doesn't look quite right. And they can really try to, I mean, if it's a master's athlete, then you can see if they're really trying to kind of fix that. Or if they just can't.
Okay.
Sue, on some of the big meets, I know when the road race goes on, they have electronics stretched across the road. How does that affect the walkers? And do the judges judge in that position, or do they kind of avoid that?
So so if it's a big like again, we're coming up to Santee, or we've done it in Owego on a road course there. It really would just be kind of that start finish line that would have that timing mat or
Right.
equipment across it. And so, the race walkers really, and I can say it from personal experience, having raced over them in Toronto, and also, certainly working a number of them, both as a mom and as a and as a an official. It doesn't even phase them. It's so flat that it's really pretty easy to get over.
Okay.
It
Good.
doesn't stop them. And
Curiosity.
usually there's not an official like right at the finish. The chief judge would be sort of within that last 150 meters, sort of in that area around the finish. And then the next judge would be kind of the other side of that line, covering that first part.
Thanks.
Yep. But I will say that does raise a thought in my head. I mean, if you are doing any road event, know that typically, and it's decided which direction and how often, but the officials rotate. So they rotate spots. So if you have 5 officials, it might be depending on the length of the race, every 30 minutes to 45 minutes, you're rotating one spot to the right or one spot to the left. Again, depending on what's been determined moving into the start of that race, but you rotate. So you don't stay in that same section through the whole 20K or 50K.
That was a point I was going to bring up is,
Are there any other questions?
can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, Matt.
Even as we saw at the indoor meets, that you don't just set up a camp and sit in one spot. You actually move over the course of a period of meters, and then during the race, you'll move to a different series of meters. So that's a good point to bring up too.
Yep. But it's always, whenever you're judging, and it's hard to do this with my camera, but I always like to think of it like I stretch my arms out. If I were like in a room and my arms would go like to the front corners of the room, and that's my judging zone, right? So if you think about it, that's your judging zone. So you don't want to get them coming in any sooner or follow them out any later. That's your zone, and you should be stationary and looking at them. And as they come in, again, depending, and the video made a great point about this, depending on how far back you are, you can have several progressions of steps through that, which gives you a really good snapshot of where those athletes are at, and makes it so much easier when they're clumped together.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Sharon. That was
Sure.
very informative. Matt, would you like to do combined events now?
Oh yeah, that'd be fine. All right, so sitting through the first three of these that we did, I really sat there and thought about combined events, and there's one major difference at a national championships versus local events, smaller high school and college meets. And the reason there's only one major difference is the rule books look up the chain to World Athletics to describe how you actually run the long jump in a combined events, how you run the high jump in a combined events, how you do the running events. So because all the rule books look up, the rules of the events are all basically the same. One major difference might be that USATF doesn't break ties, where NCAA does, but by and large the rules are all pretty much the same. So as I'm looking at it, there's the one major difference is at high school combined events, at college combined events and such. The combined events coordinator is oftentimes actually judging those events, where at national championships, it's much more of an administrative role, and the long jump crew is actually running the long jump. So this is, kind of interesting and funny to me, because one of the things that drew my interest in combined events was doing vertical jumps at high school meets, doing throws events at college meets, doing horizontal jumps, doing umpiring at a variety of different meets. And so I kept getting all this different experience, and it really drew me towards combined events because that was what they were specializing in as well. And I very much enjoy the administrative side of doing the combined events at national championships, but it was just funny how that's the major difference. And it's what actually drew me to. So when I think about my role as a combined events coordinator at national championships, it's really almost a mixture of a telephone switchboard operator, a concierge, and a shepherd. And so I really was trying to think of three very funny ways of describing. My role is to make sure that each athlete individually, as well as the entire group, is able to have the best competition, in theory, to PR in every single event throughout the competition. Of course, that's not actually possible. But my role is really to just make sure that it goes smoothly for them. I will let them know if they have any questions about any event. Definitely come to me. Typically bathroom breaks, that kind of stuff will all run through the coordinator, and we'll have a process set up beforehand to take care of that kind of thing. I did want to note that the combined events coordinator position is described in Rule 139.4, and it says that a combined events coordinator may be assigned for the combined events. He or she shall be present at all times to assist in the conduct of the event and shall report to the assigned referee. And that's basically what I was describing. It's administrative. It's making sure that everything is going smoothly as best as possible. So one of the things, when I get to the meet location early, the day before something, prior to the athletes actually arriving, I'll go around to the various field events. If I can get in touch with the chief of that field event, that's the best. But I'll look and just make sure that everything looks set up properly. Of course, working with that chief, working with throws or jumps referees or technical manager, whoever the case may be. And we'll have a quick communication about what the time schedule looks like, anticipating when our group of athletes may get to their field event. And as well, we will typically set up a communication process so that they can get their crew ready to be at the event before we arrive. So a lot of times that's through cell phones, depending on if we know the crew's going to be eating lunch right before we get there, just setting up that communication process. I'll go over and speak with the clerks prior to the athletes getting there as well. The clerks have been very helpful in when the athletes come to them first thing in the day to get their anticipated opening height for whichever vertical jump is going to be that day. And that's very helpful. The vertical crews like to have that information well in advance. And of course, we refine that during warm-ups and stuff to get it a little bit closer to what they're actually going to do. But it's helpful for that crew to know what the progression will be, and we try to get that information to them as early as possible. Let's see. As far as the clerks go, of course, we'll also talk about the final running event of the day and how that hip numbers and stuff is going to be transferred, when that's going to be done. So, of course, I'll oftentimes, go do something when the athletes are actually reporting for the first event of the day. I'll come back, I'll introduce myself to them, describe a little bit as to, how I'm going to be helpful to them, and that they can ask me any question throughout the day, and I'll do the best to grant their wish. So yeah, I'll just be describing that I'll be escorting them throughout the competition and be a resource for them, communicating start times of the next events as we finish up the one previous. It is worthwhile to note that, the rules do call for a minimum of 30 minutes between events. And, we'll work on that out depending on if another event is in that venue at the time, or some other thing is going to reduce the amount of time that they would have for warming up for that field event. So they're granted at least 30 minutes, and it sometimes is a little bit more, but we do typically try to stay pretty close to that 30 minutes between events. So one of the other big differences would be working with a referee that's specifically for the combined events. Of course, there's a men's and a women's competition, so that referees bouncing back and forth between many different venues, and also, I guess what I should say is the different referees that I've worked with will handle their position slightly differently. Some will be much more, as the referee, their decision is what counts. And many times also there's a very much a communication line between the coordinator and the referee, and discussing what's actually best. So that's a little bit different, but you take the referee that you get, I guess. Specifically with the referee, the 30-minute start time, and then we'll have discussions on any kind of, I call it gray area, because it's things that aren't necessarily covered in the rule book. And one example that I had for that was at a recent U20 championships in Miramar, Florida. This was a June meet. There were only 4 athletes competing in my decathlon. And it was quite hot down there in Miami in later June. So I thought to myself, instead of 12 jumps, 12 throws taking approximately 10 minutes, maybe we could stretch that out a little bit within the rules. And so with the referee discussing that situation, we decided that at the end of each round of throws or round of jumps, we would ask the crews to just take 2 minutes and rake that pit really, really well.
I'll put
And-
them to work.
Put them to work, and just to allow a little bit of break. And we were very clear with the athletes that if they were the first one of that round, when they felt ready to go, they did not have to wait for 2 minutes, but they were allowed, this little bit of extra recovery time and time to chat with their coaches. That's something that's very common as well. So that worked out. And I would say Chris might be able to back me up on this. I think the long jump took almost 15 minutes. So we stretched it out to a almost reasonable amount of time for 4 athletes. And the athletes and the coaches both thanked us for allowing that slight adjustment in the schedule. So that goes back to the objective is to have the athletes have as good of a competition as they can possibly have. And that was quite helpful for them.
Yeah, the 2 minutes of raking meant that we needed a minute water break for the crew that was doing the raking.
Yeah. Hot for you guys too?
It was quite hot, but and I will say, Chris, I did get a lot of feedback, even from the crews, that it was nice to just be able to relax just a little bit. So it worked out very well. One of the other notes, just as I was kind of looking through the rules, the USATF rules do prescribe reading of the updated scores for each event. And I thought it doesn't actually prescribe how loudly I'm supposed to be reading those results. And basically I say that because in my experience, there's many athletes who really don't want to know what the score is throughout the competition. There are some that do want to know maybe before the running event, the final running event of the day. And there are some that do want to just, how great did I do in that event, or how poorly did I do in that event? And, most of them do know as well, the question about the technology. Even by the time I come back with those paper copies, it's typically already updated electronically, and, coaches have it on their phones, etc. So I make it very well known to the athletes that I will have those sheets. They are welcome to the information should they like it. And even when I get back to them with those sheets, I'll say, I have the updated score sheets. Anybody want to know? And we'll just go along. So that's just a little note, because athletes don't actually always want to know. And that has worked out quite well. So other responsibilities, since you're not actually running the long jump, and this is going to change, obviously, every competition based on what actually happens throughout the competitions. But the bulk of what I do is related to walking. I always get a lot of steps when during the day when I'm combined events coordinator. So it will be walking back and forth from the current field event to the next field event to give them a heads up. We're in the final round. If an athlete gets injured and has gone to the medic area, I will be going back and forth with quite frequency to keep the field event up to date. Is the athlete returning? To keep the athlete up to date. The start time is in 15 minutes. Keeping the medics up to date as to where we're at as well. Just trying to keep all that communication flowing as best as possible. And then again, taking the paper copies results of field sheets up to the timing company for them to enter that data. And in many cases, checking to make sure that the paper copies do in fact coincide with the field links copies, which they've already received, and then bringing those paper forms back down. So there's a lot of walking involved, and just delivering that information by hand. I'm sure that there are quite a few coordinators who will look forward to more technology, which should reduce the amount of walking. But as of right now, that's a major part of it. Let's see. As far as what the coordinator position, I mean, that pretty much covers at least an overview of what it is that we're currently doing. The major difference being the administrative role more so than actually running field events. I did promise Dave Hillingus that I would dig a little deeper into the question that he had asked, and so I pulled out some specific information. I mean, I think I already
Taking notes.
discussed a couple weeks ago how it kind of reads and stuff. So I typed some stuff out. I made the English a little bit more digestible, while still keeping the thoughts clear. So we're looking at Rule 180.10, which, if I remember correctly, is in the field events area, the general rules. And Rule 180.10 applies to all field events, including those contested in the combined event. So that's part of the note 3. So 180.10, 180.10 states, if a competitor misses a turn in a field event for any reason, they shall be permitted to have practice trials in the competition area. They shall not be permitted to have practice trials in the competition area or to take any of the missed trials that they had. But they may be permitted to take any remaining trials if, which is a big if, they were entered in the event before it began. So national championships, you're not going to have somebody randomly walking up to the event and trying to jump into it. They would already be entered into the event. So also, if an athlete by their own decision takes a trial out of order, they should receive a warning, but the result of that trial will stand. So that could either be someone being confused of who they were following. I would like to believe an athlete wouldn't just decide to make a throw or a jump outside of their outside of the prescribed order. So C indicates that if an athlete is entered in multiple events, either running or multiple field events, taking place simultaneously, the appropriate referee or chief field judge may, for one round of trials at a time, allow the competitor to take a trial out of the regular order. If the athlete subsequently is not present for any trial, it shall deemed the athlete is passing once the period allowed for the trial has elapsed. So you should run the 60-second clock. If they still don't show up, then they get a pass instead of a foul. Of course, that's much more helpful for the vertical jumps than for the horizontal jumps. But that was a bit of a surprise when I had heard that earlier this year, and I think it's one of those things that we, especially at the national championships, we don't encounter that quite as much. Maybe at NCAA championships, but this is a USATF rule, so that's not even much of the issue. It was interesting to see that. So.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep. So the only other thing that I really was thinking back before we'll open up to any questions that you might have, kind of was related to what a lot of people have talked about in the first couple of Zooms. It's kind of like my suggestion for things to consider and to do when working national championships. So number one for me was to, enjoy yourself, to have fun and be open to learning as much as you can from others. I think it's funny to me when I hear referees who've been officiating for 40 plus years say the same thing. They go to national championships looking to not only have a good time, but to also learn something new. So that's something that's, I think, is very important. Number two, right below that, reread your rule book, especially the section that you're going to be officiating on. You know, especially when we are doing 3 different rule books, sometimes 4, it can be easy to get things confused. So rereading your rule book, and especially the section that you're working on that meet, is definitely something very important. And number 3, I had show up early. There's no reason to show up at the prescribed time. Show up 10 minutes early, 15 minutes early. Be ready, and be willing to stay late too. That's something that I've always enjoyed doing, is either watching part of the track meet or just, you know, helping out lap counting or something like that. It's a good thing to do. Number 4, we talked about a couple of times. Hold the mark. Hold that mark long after you think that that the throw has been tabulated, until you know for sure. Just hold that mark, and right along with that, slow flags. Be slow to raise up the flag. Know which one you're putting up. Know which one you should be putting up, and leave it up there. Leave it up there for the people in the field to know. And even myself as a coordinator, I will oftentimes take one of the extra sheets. Even if I'm running all around, I'll try to stay engaged where the competition is, who's still involved, what round we are in, and so I'll be keeping notes. And there are times when the flag is gone, and I looking, well, I don't know what happened, so I guess I'm just moving on. So I very much appreciate slow flags as well. Another one that I had thought of was be willing to help if asked. And so this goes along with lap counting. Sometimes you're not asked, you're told. But if you're asked to help with anything, you know, definitely feel free, be willing to do that. So one of the other meets, as a combined events coordinator, I was standing around at the horizontal pit, and the discussion was that they were going to be moving some of the sand from one of the pits to the competition pits. And
Time for the
well,
shovel.
well, I got a half an hour. Give me a shovel, I'll help out. And so that's something to just be cognizant of. You know, be willing to help when asked. And the last one that I'll really go to is TV and audio are everywhere, and be aware of it. You never know what's, like Chris had mentioned, you never know what's going to get picked up. You never know where there's a camera or a video behind something, and you know, what you do is going to be out there for everybody to see. So just be aware of that. So that is about all I've got. Questions?
I've got one, Matt. What are your expectations as a coordinator at a championship? You know, say I'm, you know, working long jump. So you've got, you know, multiple heats of the, you know, 100 going on beforehand, and athletes are coming over in staggered form as their heats are done. You know, my assumption is you want everybody's 30 minutes to start at the same time. You want everybody's warm up opportunity to start at the same time. So, you know, I would assume things like handing out runway markers and stuff like that, your expectation is you wait until all the athletes are present, as opposed to kind of piecemeal as they make their way over.
Yeah, definitely. So my preferred way of starting that 30-minute clock, and again, a little bit of this depends on the layout of the venue, the relationship with the referee, how everything's going to play out. But my preferred process is, once that final 100 goes off, I'm going to gather up my things. I'm going to make sure that the athletes are all pretty well set to go. When I get to the long jump pit, that's when the 30 minutes will start, because I know I'm not going to dawdle or get lost. And I'm not going to run over there. So typically the long jump crew will already be on board with handing out runway markers is fine, but until I get there, the runway won't open. So they can do strides if that's what they want to do. In most of the combined event coordinators I've done has been with what I call the younger athletes. It's been NCAA, it's been U20. What I will typically do is try to gather all of those athletes. This is the shepherd side of it. I will try to gather those athletes and bring them all over to me in one group. My understanding is at the senior level, that may not happen exactly the same way. That they have a very much an understanding of their responsibility, and we'll give them an anticipated start time of that long jump. Little bit of differences, but by and large, when I get there, that's when we're going to anticipate that 30 minutes going. At the senior championships, if my memory serves me correctly, it's nowhere near 30 minutes. Long jump will start an hour later, 55 minutes later, something like that. So that's is a little bit different setup there as well, but that's how I typically like to do it.
All right, thank you.
Hey,
Matt?
Matt. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. On page 119, letter D, for what value this question is, it says if there are more than 16 or more competitors, it is recommended that more than one facility be used for field events. It's page 119, letter D. Does that kind of put a monkey wrench in things? I mean, you're two different, what does it mean facility?
It'd
It's going to
be,
complicate.
yeah, not two different stadiums typically.
Okay, you said facility.
Yeah, it'd be
Bad
more,
wording.
yeah, more like two different throwing circles or two different horizontal pits.
That makes it tougher.
They're still usually pretty close to each other.
Okay.
The groups are going to take slightly different amounts of time, but yeah, not two different stadiums.
Yeah, that bad wording. Okay. All right.
It makes it a little tougher when there's two horizontal pits, but only one wind gauge at a NCAA
see?
championship, and you're trying to run both pits at once.
I knew it'd be complicated.
Yeah, somewhere that disappeared. Or it never arrived, one or the other. But
I'm going to vote for the latter.
But there was a very good, I mean, we worked out a process that would work. So basically we still had two flight coordinators, didn't we? But the one wind gauge operator was pre-flight coordinating for each flight. All right, you're up. It was an interesting dance, but we got it done.
I've seen situations where they had large flights like that, and they split them up. Point in case like the shot, they'll have one circle, then they have the other circle, and basically what they try to do is do a simultaneously start for both events, so they kind of end about the same time, so you can start preparing for your next event. So I've seen that happen. It will be a challenge for, like discus. If you had 16 and you only got one throwing circle, you're just going to have to use that one venue. So, all right.
Thanks, Terry.
And when they do that, if they have to split them into different venues, do they do that by previous performance, so that the top 16 jumpers are in one pit and the next bottom 8 jumpers by previous performance is in the other pit?
I've seen it where like in the verticals, they'll have a high and a low.
Right.
In the shot, they'll just split it in half. Usually your CE referee will make that determination on who goes where. So, but, like I said, in the case of, throwing a discus with your combined athletes, they're going to throw out of that one cage because you don't have another venue to go through.
Yeah. But it's by performance and not by score up till that point.
Correct.
Yeah. If there's marks that have been submitted, then yes, they'll break them up that way. So for most national championships, that would be the way that they would do it. So for maybe some of your earlier college combined events, it may just be a purely random. So
Matt, do you also have to make a stadium announcement as to when the next event starts? So
Yeah,
that spectators, coaches know?
yeah, that's definitely communicating with the stadium announcer, with the referees. Yep, communicating all that stuff.
Okay.
Yep. Anybody else?
Does anybody have any questions, race walk, combined events that they thought of? Okay, if nobody,
One quick question, Sharon, that, the training video, is that available to everybody?
Absolutely. There's actually
That's
3
good.
on that site. It's racewalking.com.
Thank you.
And Jeff Salvage has put together 3. So there's that complete one, and then there's 2 others that work scenarios that are really helpful.
Wonderful. That's great. That's all. We do it, the high school in section 6. So that's great information.
Yeah,
Thank
and they're
you.
working on some more, some virtual stuff as well. So there will be more stuff rolling out in the future with them as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
anybody else? Okay, thank you, Matt, for your presentation. That was very helpful or informative. And next Monday, March 1st, we are going to have starting Perry Jenkins and Tim Toy, clerking Dan Egan, and line clerk Tom Mooney. If there's no other questions, I guess we are done for the night. And thank you again, Sharon and Matt.
Thank you.
welcome.
Thanks for
Great
having
job,
us.
guys.
Okay.
Thanks,
Hi,
Kathy.
Malachi.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Matt and Hanley.
There's the tay.